You know how, like, when we were younger, we had all those, like, epic stories?
Mm-hmm.
The myths, the legends,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ones that really kind of stuck with us.
Uh-huh.
And they always seem to have these, like, really larger-than-life women in them, but then it's like somewhere along the way, history kind of, I don't know, like, shrunk them down.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Made them into symbols or footnotes or something.
It's a pattern. Happens all the time, sadly.
What?
But here's the thing, what I find so fascinating is how those symbols, those like simplified versions, they get picked up, right?
Uh-huh.
And then they get reinterpreted across like different times and places.
Yeah.
And sometimes they even end up being used to justify things that the original story never even like intended.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Mm.
And that's exactly why today we're going to dive into the story of Lucretia,
Oh, Lucretia. Okay.
this Roman noblewoman.
Mm.
Her tragic story supposedly led to the birth of the Roman Republic, right?
Right.
But it's a story that's been told and retold for centuries. And each time it seems to say something different about the world in which it's being told.
And what makes her case, her story, so compelling is that we only have the accounts of men to like go on. We have to rely on those.
Interesting.
Livy, Ovid, Augustine, Shakespeare, Rousseau. I mean, each of them saw something different in Lucretia's story,
Huh.
and they used that something to kind of make their own points.
It's almost like we're looking at this hall of mirrors, trying to find the real Lucretia in the middle of all these reflections.
Yeah, I like that.
But let's just start with the version that most people, I think, kind of think they know. The one that gets passed down as historical fact.
The so-called original story.
Right.
Yeah. The one that sets the stage for all the other interpretations that come after.
Okay, so for those who need a refresher, Lucretia. She was renowned for her beauty and her virtue. She's married to a nobleman named Collatinus. And this is during the reign of the last king of Rome, Tarquinius Superbus.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say that he wasn't really known for his sensitivity, let's put it that way.
And his son, Sextus Tarquinius, he becomes like utterly fixated on the Lucretia,
Okay.
driven by, her reputation for chastity, as much as her physical beauty, I mean.
Yeah, it's almost like they set her up to be this symbol of perfect Roman womanhood, right?
Right.
And this whole story hinges on this rather strange wife contest going on between Collatinus and some of the king's men.
A contest, if you want to call it that, where like
Yeah.
the prize goes to whoever has the most devoted and virtuous wife.
Right. So to kind of prove his point, Collatinus takes this group of guys back to Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to surprise their wives.
Uh-huh.
And of course, all the other wives are out enjoying themselves.
Right.
But not Lucretia.
Oh, no.
She's at home, diligently weaving away like the ideal Roman matron.
And this just fuels Sextus Tarquinius' obsession even more.
Oh, wow.
Because he sees her as like this unattainable prize, like a challenge to his masculinity, his power, all of it.
And that obsession takes kind of a dark turn, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sextus sneaks back into Collatinus's house, enters Lucretia's bedroom at night, and threatens her. Tells her if she doesn't sleep with him, that he will kill her.
Oh.
But then it gets even worse. He says that he'll kill a slave and arrange their bodies together, and he'll claim that he caught them having an affair, and that he killed them in a fit of jealous rage.
It's a chilling example of how those in power could exploit the social codes, right? The expectations placed on women,
Right.
especially their reputation. I mean, can you even imagine the weight of that threat, the shame it would bring on her and her family?
It's a horrible situation.
Yeah.
And Lucretia, she's fearing for her reputation and the lives of those around her, so she ultimately submits to the assault.
But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, Lucretia summons her husband, her father, and some trusted friends, including a man named Brutus.
Brutus.
Yeah.
As in the Brutus, the
Yeah.
guy who will eventually go on to be a key figure in the founding of the Roman Republic.
The very same.
Wow.
Lucretia, she reveals everything that happened. She produces this hidden dagger and takes her own life.
Whoa. So her death isn't just like a personal tragedy. It becomes this political flashpoint.
Precisely. Brutus, seeing this as a symbol of the tyranny of the Tarquin dynasty, uses her suicide to incite a rebellion.
Why?
They display her body publicly, showcasing the king's cruelty and the consequences of his family's, unchecked power.
And this public outcry, it eventually leads to the overthrow of the monarchy and paves the way for the Roman Republic.
Yeah.
It's an incredible chain of events, but I keep coming back to the fact that this is just one version of the story.
Yeah.
One that was passed down for centuries, like orally, before it was ever even written down.
Yeah. Right. And that's exactly why it's so important to look at the different interpretations, to see how each writer took this foundational narrative and shaped it
Yeah.
to fit their own time, their own purpose.
Exactly. So should we start by comparing Livy and Ovid?
Sure.
Two Roman writers, two very different takes on Lucretia's story.
Let's dive in.
Okay.
Livy, writing during the reign of Augustus Caesar, focuses on Lucretia's heroic death,
Okay.
portraying her as the epitome of like Roman virtue and courage.
Yeah, and he really emphasizes the way she dies. He even makes it sound almost masculine. Remember, stabbing yourself wasn't really the typical way Roman women took their own lives back then.
Right. He uses that imagery to really underscore the severity of the crime against her, to highlight her like extraordinary strength in response. And it's clear that he's using Lucretia to illustrate the corruption of the Tarquin dynasty. It's a subtle way of legitimizing Augustus Caesar's rule.
Interesting. So there's some political maneuvering happening there. But what about Ovid? His Lucretia seems much more emotional, more human. He even gives us a physical description of her. Snowy complexion, golden hair, no makeup, a vision of feminine beauty, even by, like, Roman standards.
That's right. While Livy focuses on the political implications, Ovid, he delves into the personal tragedy. And we have to remember that Ovid was writing from exile, banished by Augustus.
Oh, that's right.
Possibly for his writing, that challenged the emperor's moral reforms.
So is it possible that Ovid is using Lucretia's story to comment on, like, power and abuse? Maybe even reflecting his own experience with, a ruler's whims.
It's certainly a possibility, but get ready for a real twist because we're bringing in Augustine.
Okay, Augustine, the early Christian theologian.
Yeah.
I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting.
You're not wrong. Centuries after Livy and Ovid, Augustine comes along and radically reinterprets Lucretia's story.
Right.
He claims that she actually consented to the act and that she only killed herself out of guilt.
Wait, what? That completely contradicts everything we've heard so far.
Exactly, but we have to remember the context.
Right.
Augustine was writing during a period of intense religious conflict, between pagans and Christians.
Okay.
He uses Lucretia's story, right, this iconic figure of Roman virtue, to critique pagan morality. He argues that even their most celebrated heroine was flawed.
So he's basically using Lucretia's story to score points in this larger religious debate.
In a way, yes. And his interpretation, it had a huge impact, shaping Western views on suicide for centuries to come. It's a stark reminder of how historical narratives can be manipulated,
Right,
and reinterpreted to fit different agendas.
Wow, talk about a plot twist. But we're not done yet, are we?
Not even close.
We still have Shakespeare and Rousseau's interpretations to unpack.
We do. But we'll save those for part 2 of our deep dive into the ever-evolving story of Lucretia. So we ended last time on Augustine and his take on Lucretia's story.
Augustine and his whole consent out of lust theory,
Yeah.
right? Using Lucretia as this pawn in this big pagan versus Christian showdown.
Right, yeah. It really makes you think about how history can be rewritten to fit certain agendas.
It does.
And that ripple effect carries on through history, influencing how later writers and artists approach Lucretia's story. But let's fast forward now a few centuries to the Renaissance.
Okay.
And see what Shakespeare does with her.
Ah, Shakespeare. The master storyteller. I'm betting he didn't shy away from the drama in Lucretia's tale.
He did not, but he also does something kind of unexpected.
Right.
In his narrative poem, The Rape of Lucrece, her suicide doesn't lead to the founding of the Republic. In fact, the whole Republic thing isn't even mentioned.
Well, seriously, that's a huge departure from the classic version.
It is. Shakespeare shifts the focus from political upheaval to individual morality.
Right.
His Tarquin becomes less a symbol of a corrupt system, and more a study of a deeply flawed individual.
So it's less about revolution and more about this personal corruption.
Precisely. And remember, Shakespeare was writing in Elizabethan England, a time of strong monarchy. Some scholars suggest he might even be subtly flattering Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh, really?
By drawing these parallels between her and Lucretia. both strong women navigating a world, dominated by men.
Oh, that's an interesting take. So Shakespeare's Lucretia is still virtuous, but her tragedy is a personal one,
Yeah.
not this political spark. What does that say about how her story was evolving?
I think it shows how malleable Lucretia's image could be, how she could be adapted to fit the concerns of different times.
Uh-huh.
In Shakespeare's hands, she becomes this symbol of female chastity and
Right.
and the dangers of unchecked male desire.
Yeah.
Themes that would have resonated deeply in Renaissance society.
That makes sense. But before we wrap things up, we have to talk about Rousseau.
Mhm.
He brings back that theme of revolution, right?
He does. Rousseau, writing in 18th century France, was all about challenging authority,
Uh-huh.
championing individual liberty.
Mhm.
His unfinished play, L'amour de Lucrèce, puts Lucretia back at the center of a political storm.
I love that he brought back that element of her story. What kind of spin does he put on it?
Well, he adds some interesting complexities.
Right.
In his version, Lucretia and Sextus Tarquinius were actually engaged at one point,
Oh, really?
but her father broke it off
Yeah.
for political reasons, and there's even a hint of lingering attraction between them.
Oh, wow. That adds a whole new layer to their relationship.
Yeah.
So she's not just a passive victim in Rousseau's verse.
Not at all. He gives her more agency,
No.
more internal conflict. And then there's Brutus, who's already plotting a revolution before the whole Lucretia situation even unfolds.
So it's like Brutus is using Lucretia's tragedy to advance his own agenda.
Mm.
Does that make him less heroic?
That's a good question. I think Rousseau is grappling with some complex ideas here. On the one hand, he wants to show the power of a single act of defiance, right?
Right.
To inspire change.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's acknowledging that even revolutions can be driven by personal ambition
Right.
and opportunism.
It's a reminder that history is never simple,
Right.
right? There are always multiple perspectives, multiple motives at play.
Exactly. Rousseau's Lucretia becomes this symbol of hope,
Right.
a catalyst for a more just and equitable society.
Right.
And in a way that brings us full circle back to that idea of her as a symbol of revolution.
Yeah.
But, we've mostly been looking at how men have interpreted her story.
Right. That's what I was just thinking. What about the women? What
Yeah.
about the women in all of this? Is there a different perspective that we're missing?
That's a fantastic question. And it leads us to a truly remarkable figure,
Okay.
Artemisia Gentileschi,
Okay.
a groundbreaking female painter who dared to depict Lucretia with a depth and complexity that was rarely seen before.
Okay. Now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about Artemisia and her take on Lucretia. Artemisia Gentileschi, a female artist daring to, reinterpret such a loaded story. It feels like we're finally getting to hear from like a woman in all of this. What makes her so groundbreaking?
Well, she was one of the most prominent female painters of the Baroque period, a
Yes.
time when art was all about drama and emotion, and she brought those qualities to her work in a way that few others could.
Intriguing, but how did she approach Lucretia's story specifically? Did she paint her like multiple times?
She did, but there's this one painting from 1625 that really stands out. Okay.
It's a powerful and haunting depiction, very different from the often eroticized portrayals by male artists of the time.
Okay. I'm picturing this painting in my mind. What makes it so unique?
Imagine this. Lucretia, she's captured right before the act. She's holding the knife, and her expression is this mix of anguish and determination. And there's this incredible tension in her posture, like a sense of both vulnerability and defiance.
Wow. That's a powerful image. I can see why it's so captivating. Is there something about Artemisia's own life experiences that might have influenced her portrayal of Lucretia?
It's a question worth considering, I think. Artemisia was raped by another painter when she was young and had to endure this humiliating trial, where she was even tortured to prove that she was telling the truth.
That's just horrific. It makes her artistic achievements even more remarkable considering what she went through.
It really does. It speaks to her incredible resilience. And many scholars believe that her own experience with sexual assault deeply informed her portrayal of Lucretia. That makes sense. It's like she's able to give Lucretia a voice, a depth of emotion that the male writers and painters just couldn't capture.
I think that's a really insightful observation. Artemisia's Lucretia isn't just a a symbol of chastity or a political pawn. She's a real woman grappling with trauma, with pain, and these impossible choices. It's a much more nuanced and humanizing portrayal.
It reminds us that behind these historical narratives are real human beings with their own stories, their own struggles. And sometimes it takes a different perspective to truly, truly bring those stories to life.
Absolutely. And I encourage you to seek out Artemisia's paintings of Lucretia. Seeing them firsthand is a moving experience. They offer a powerful counterpoint to the male-dominated narrative that has often defined Lucretia's story.
Definitely adding that to my list.
Yeah.
So after all of this, what have we learned about Lucretia? Is she more than just a myth?
That's the big question, isn't it? We've seen how her story has been shaped and reshaped throughout history. It's almost impossible to separate fact from fiction at this point.
But maybe that's part of what makes her story so enduring, right?
Yeah.
She becomes this kind of mirror, reflecting the anxieties and beliefs of each era that retells her tale.
Exactly. She's been seen as a symbol of female virtue, a victim of male violence, a catalyst for revolution, a cautionary tale, a figure of hope. And ultimately, she's probably all of those things and none of them.
It makes you wonder if Lucretia could speak for herself, what story would she tell?
Here's a question to think about. If Lucretia could speak, what would she say about how her story has been told
Right.
and used throughout history? What truths would she reveal? What injustices would she call out?
Wow, that's really something to ponder.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest takeaway is that history is never truly objective.
Right?
It's always told from a particular perspective,
Mhm.
often shaped by those in power.
And in a world that's flooded with information, it's more important than ever to question the narratives that we're given, to seek out multiple perspectives, and to listen to those voices that have been silenced or marginalized.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating topics like this with you. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions.